Welcome, everyone. Today is Venus-Neptune Day, and this is the third installment of the Octave series, where I've been describing and discussing the interrelation, the intimate connection between personal planets and transpersonal planets, which also are referred to as the outer planets. So, just a quick recap. Um, as mentioned, Venus and Neptune. Neptune is considered the higher octave of Venus. Pluto is considered the higher octave of Mars. Uranus, the higher octave of Mercury. So I have already published the Mars, Pluto, Uranus, Mercury teachings and video. It's on my YouTube channel. You can do a search. And of course, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel because it really helps us produce free content and get the support to continue this journey. Obviously, I also would like to encourage you to visit my website, mauricefernandez.com, where you can book private consultations and look how your chart describes your soul journey. If you need clarity about anything in your life, practical matters as well as why I'm here, what is my soul purpose. I also offer an educational program, diploma course in evolutionary astrology, which is including some of these concepts that we're discussing today. But really the purpose of this program is for anyone who participates to confidently be able to put all the charts component together to master the analysis and understand it from a soul journey point of view, because this is why I'm here for. I'm not focused on deterministic astrology. I'm focusing on soul growth and evolutionary purposes. So the octaves, when we speak about the interrelationship between the personal and the transpersonal planets, we realize that there is an immediate correlation that is important to understand and consider that will help us in analysis. So I'm going to recap a little bit of these principles, even though I've touched on it in the previous videos. For those who see this for the first time, we obviously have 12 signs. And initially, before the telescopes were created, we only could see planets up to Saturn. So the sun and the moon, ruling Leo and Cancer, are at the center. And then if you go left and right, clockwise, counterclockwise, you have two mercurial signs, then two Venusian signs, then two Martian signs, two Jupiterian signs, and two Saturnian signs, until the 1700s, when Uranus was discovered. And that was around the time of the Industrial Revolution. A lot of progress, advancement of technology and machines replacing human labor, making things faster and more precise, but also affecting the work force, the labor force of the time, of course. It was also the time of important revolution, namely French Revolution and the American Revolution. So very Uranian times indeed. In the 1800s, Neptune was discovered, 1846, if I'm not mistaken. And this was a time where people were looking, following the gold rush to the Wild West in the United States. It was also a time where oil was distilled So many natural resources were were the focus of the attention. And it was, of course, a time, if we look at it from a cultural point of view, where there was a gradual revival of spirituality, late 1800s, after years where the science was more prominent. The age of enlightenment was an age where that separated from the church and saw a more rational, more academic, more scientific approach, um, looking at things like astrology as superstition. So the discovery of Neptune led to the return of spirituality to the mainstream. For example, in late 1800s is when a lot of the Eastern philosophies coming from India started to migrate to the West, and people, began to contemplate reincarnation again. What is karma? The practice of yoga was introduced to the West. So I'm speaking from a Western point of view. Excuse me. But I'm sure you will find important development in any cultures that of the time that we could associate with Neptune. 1930 is when Pluto was discovered, and Pluto, 1930, think about the time of big crisis in our culture. 1929 was a stock market crash that led to a recession and poverty. People, probably struggle in ways that were really extreme considering the times. And obviously, this was also the rise of Nazi Germany, fascism, because of deep financial insecurities that plagued Germany following the Second World War, but also, as we said, there was a global employment crisis. This is also the time soon after, into the late 30s into the 40s, where the atomic bomb was created, later the hydrogen bomb. So weapons of mass destruction, very difficult, Plutonian themes. But at the same time, as Pluto represents destruction and the risk of abuse of power, it also brought a renaissance, a rebirth, that we are going to talk about today. I just wanted to highlight how important these transpersonal planets are and how their discovery, the fact that they were always there is just a fact. If you were born before they were discovered, it doesn't mean they didn't apply to your chart. But the fact that humanity became aware of them and that these world events occurred that captured the symbolism, the meanings, the themes of those planets is part of what we call synchronicity. It's part of how we see astrology working. Now, because these transpersonal planets, are not visible, they often are associated with the unconscious. And this, to me, is only partially true, because you can definitely become more conscious of them. You can understand how they operate in your own life very consciously. But if you are not self-aware at all, you may indeed feel like it's, you're not aware that it's affecting you. So it all depends on basically the level of consciousness to determine what would be operating more subliminally or more consciously. Because they're further away, they also move slower through the zodiacal wheel. And this means that they stay longer in signs, take longer to complete a cycle. Uranus stays about 7 years in a sign, completes a cycle in 83, 84 years. Neptune stays double, 14 years in a sign, and about 165 years for a full return. Pluto stays 11 to 30 plus years in a sign, given its eccentric orbit. And so complete cycle in 246 years. So since they were discovered, astrologers looked at those synchronicities and eventually came to the conclusions that they would be new rulers of Pluto for Scorpio, Uranus for Aquarius, and Neptune for Pisces. And I am very much of that school of thought that they are the modern rulers and they are the main rulers of these signs. And not because I'm just parroting what previous astrologers did, but I do see, as you will also hear me through this session, I do see that it matches, that it works, that it's something reliable. So hear me out. So Pluto would rule Scorpio and would be the higher octave of Mars. Mars rules Aries and is the initial ruler of Scorpio. Uranus rules Aquarius, and Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo. Before Uranus was discovered, Saturn was ruling Aquarius. And then Neptune rules Pisces, while Venus rules Taurus and Libra. And before Neptune was discovered, Jupiter was ruling Pisces, as you can see in this chart. So obviously, traditional astrologers look at this and say, you're just disrupting the natural order of things. Look how neatly placed everything is, from the moon out to the outer boundaries of Saturn. If you introduce these outer planets, doesn't fit into this nice little pattern. Fairly said. However, again, we're not going for neat, we're going for what works. So I want to examine this more deeply and not just rely on keeping my cookie cutter formula, because in the universe, nothing is so symmetrically fixed. Between 0 and 1, there's infinity. No planet really orbits perfectly in a perfect circle. There's always a tilt. There's always eccentricity. And so the universe is really intelligent intelligent, but it's not so neat and rounded. And so, let's be open-minded. What are personal planets? What are transpersonal planets, and what's in between? So from Mars, Mercury, Venus, and the respective signs, we are in the personal realm. So we begin this journey in the first house, which is the house of birth. It's the house of incarnation. It's when we descend from spirit into flesh through the mother's womb. And literally, it's a descent as mother is squatting and we come down. So all these personal signs and personal planets represents our arrival, our integration, our ability to sustain ourselves in the material dimension. Now, I personally, you will hear me say this over and over again, I associate sign with house and planet. So Aries is thematically related to the first house and to the planet ruling Mars. Taurus, second house, planet ruling Venus. Natural ruler, so to speak. Now, we have the sun and the moon in between, which are, if we may call them, the control room. So through the sun and the moon, everything is absorbed, integrated, digested into the bloodstream, and then expressed. So the moon is the digestive system, and the sun is the expression of what has been digested. So through the moons, we take in what's around us, the ideas, the people we relate to, the things we emotionally connect with. And these become part of our personal reality. So we each form our identity through the moon, through emotional attachments. So whatever defines you, if you are born in a certain country, in a certain culture, you subscribe to certain ideals and philosophies, you're a vegan or you're a Democrat or you're this and that. It's all part of what the moon has done for you. It has emotionally connected with certain things. And then the sun goes and produces according to that identity. So the sun and the moon are the centralizing forces of the whole zodiac. That's why it's so important. Everything filters through them and everything is expressed through them. This Mars, Venus, and Mercury represent how we, as we said, as we are born into this world, Mars represents the ignition, the start of our awareness. So that's, Mars has to do with opening your eyes. Whereas what came before as the 12th house is when you're asleep. You're in the womb, you're in your bed, you're under anesthesia, whatever it is. When you enter your first house, you engage, you become self-aware, and you're basically becoming active. You're transitioning from passive, from the 12th house passive, to the active. And how do you do that? You need energy, right? And Mars represents the energy supplies that we have, not only to open our eyes and to start moving around, but also to be able to face challenges and overcome adversities. I always like to compare this to when a newborn animal is born, they immediately have to learn to walk. Or you have the little turtles hatching from the eggs, rushing to the ocean, or the fowl, landing down and being awkward on its 4 feet until it's able to keep up with the parents. So that's Mars. And Mars has to do with the confirmation that you exist, that you were born, that you are here. And there's at least one person who will know that, and that's your mother. Your mother is the first and the at least one person who will know you were born and you exist. So you see that there's a natural connection between the moon and Mars and Cancer and Aries here. But what happens through the Mars principle is, as you have a certain amount of energy available through your adrenals and then through even through the sun and through air and oxygen and food and whatnot. Mars represents how far you can go, how much you can do. It has to do with your sovereignty and your power. How you power your life. And it has to do with the most primitive self-preservation instinct. So Mars will keep you alive. It's the instinct to protect yourself. It's the instinct to protect what is important to you. But it is that instinct to, either attack or run away from predators, to look both way when you cross the street, to be able to jump if you see a rock in front of you. So all these things that could endanger you, could harm you, injure you, or even kill you, every day, every moment, Mars is there to make sure you don't die, that you have reflexes, instincts that help you survive the day. So every day for Mars, it's a victory. You're here, you made another day. And from that self-preservation point of view, it's also the planet that needs to know that your survival is also in your hands, that you don't rely on someone else to save you, that you have at least minimal abilities to save yourself. This is why the need for autonomy and the need for strength is so important for Mars, because if I'm in danger and my mother or my parents are not around, I need to be able to take care of myself. I also cannot always rely on my parents to understand my choices, to agree with what I do. So when you are facing that danger, that ability to be completely autonomous, to be able to do the right thing to stay alive, is part of that. So it's that fire in your belly, the fire to be and to exist, and to keep that spark burning. Mars is the ignition, but you want to make sure that little light doesn't go out. And then that's where Venus comes in. And we're going to talk more extensively about Venus today. Venus is about your survival, of how you provide fuel, how you find food. So if you have Mars igniting the fire, you need to feed that fire. So the metabolism, the combustion, and the nourishing process. And Venus has to do with the availability of resources. Specifically as an earth sign, it has to do with what the earth provides. Earth provides wood, earth provides food, and shelter, and a place, a physical space to be. In that sense, Venus on the Taurus side also represents your physical body, how your soul can have a physical space. And basically, we call it the temple. The body is the temple of the soul. So, on the one hand, Venus represents the need to eat, the need to provide enough so that you can survive and you can sustain yourself over time. Because Mars is more immediate. You know, it's if there's danger, fight back or run or climb the tree. Venus has to do with, okay, let's make sure that we have a meal tomorrow and the day after, and that we're not going to be just relying on empty or on luck. So as an earth sign, Venus represents longer term planning. This is why it's immediately related as well to being physically, geographically in a place where you have access to food. Whether you're a hunter-gatherer and you're going to migrate with your prey so that you have, something to hunt, or whether you are a farmer who has a piece of land and can make sure that food will grow and the harvest will provide. And then Mercury obviously has to do with orientation, with understanding how things work, noticing when the sun rises, when it sets. So it's how your brain captures the different impressions, the different experiences, and is able to interpret them into something logical. So information, knowing what to do, whether somebody teaches you or whether you find out yourself, Mercury is representing your survival there. So that's before you get into the sun moon. And then once you move into the sixth house in Virgo, you use your mind to get organized. Everything that you learn through Gemini, you can now apply your skills, your organization, your planning. And obviously, you can minimize crisis, because if you know where to store your harvest and protect it from rodents and protect it from weather, and you know when to sow and when to harvest and how to do it best so you have the maximum yield. All of that is mercurial analysis, critical thinking, and learning process. Venus continues with how we work with resources with Libra, when it looks at all the things that I don't have and how I need to cooperate with other people so that I can basically exchange resources. So the Taurus side of Venus is what I'm growing, what's available to me, and the seventh house Libra side of Venus is what I can exchange. So I'm taking my vegetables, what grows on my land, and I'm exchanging that for what somebody else's is growing. It's a farmer's market. So the trading, so that you could expand, so that you don't have to do everything yourself. So it's the first step. You know, when you move into the seventh house, the upper hemisphere, it's the first step to reach beyond your own capacities, your own autonomy, your own personal control. You start to cooperate. And then comes the eighth house. And then that interplay between Mars and Pluto that I expressed before. And I just want to repeat this here because, as you can see, I've described some of these processes in the descent. So coming down from spirit into the material world, into physical incarnation, is not easy. You know, you descend from the cosmic womb, from the spiritual realms, into a physical world that is very challenging, where there's gravity, where there's limitations and death and disease, and you can injure yourself, and there are predators. So you have to kind of figure things out. And as you learn how to get food, and you learn to build shelter, and to know when to sow, and when to connect with others, all this is part of your learning process in the descent. And by the time you reach Virgo, you kind of mastered it. You know, you know how to do things. You're organized. You know that at this time you wake up, then you take care of your cattle, and you take care of your vegetables, and there's a routine that's in place that keeps you going, because the sixth house in Virgo has to do with function. Your life is functioning. And then through the seventh house is that extra step of starting to trust and rely on others. And you reach Venus, and you're at that point where, okay, I need people now, which means that I cannot do everything, and I cannot be everyone. And I have my own limitations. So that it's the first acknowledgement that you're not able to do it all. And it's not just an energy issue. It's not just that you run out of steam, or that you run out of hours a day. But, physically, we're built as polarities. So a man will need a woman in order to procreate. So I cannot reproduce on my own. There are some instances in the animal kingdom where um, you didn't need male fertilization to conceive. But in most cases, 99.9% of the cases, basically, you do need another to be able to have offspring and to continue life. So that seventh house is unavoidable. You just cannot do it all on your own. You're not anatomically created that way. But through the eighth house, something more dramatic happens, where that Mars energy that, prompted you to be born, and to start crawling, and to start walking, and to start speaking, and to become more and more autonomous and self-driven reaches its limit. And in the eighth house, you start to feel that things are not working the way they should. Your routine and your perfect little plan and your organized life is showing its limitations. Maybe you get sick, or maybe your yield this year is not as good. You had a bad harvest. Whatever happens, there's a crisis in the eighth house that suddenly makes you realize you're depleted. You don't have money, or your employers abandons you, or like we said, you run out, you don't have a good harvest, and you don't have anything to sell, and you don't have anything to feed your family. And so you go into this deep place, where your Mars feels basically that whatever you do, it's not working. Whatever you used to do does not provide results anymore. You're stuck, and that's the easy part, but you can also feel diminished. You're fired. Your self-esteem is affected. But you're also in a place where you can't go on, and there's a risk of death. That's why the eighth house has to do with your death. And that's where Pluto comes in. And Pluto says, you can get a boost, you can get a refill if you change, if you're able to become more aware of your limitations and learn what needs to be rectified, learn what you've been avoiding, look at the deeper questions of life. So instead of just using your Mars to push stronger, or to confront, or to impose your way, if you abandon me, I'm going to force you, to be with me. That's the Mars that's freaking out, and that tries to regain power, even though it's the end. The relationship died, and you can't force somebody to be with you. But Mars will try that. And so Pluto says, this death is a learning opportunity. And you need now to shift something, shift your behavior, or maybe get a degree and have better chances of having a better job, upgrade whatever is available to you. So you need to basically take action to get yourself out of a compromising situation. And that is where the shift happens from descending into the material world. The transformation of Pluto is that you rise back and you start to ascend again to understand a more spiritual perspective about life. So that is this phase that I'm describing here, the Mars-Pluto. You're exhausting the life force, facing limitations, and the first outer planet that rules a sign is Scorpio. And as you go down, Scorpio has to do with the depth, with the underworld. The underworld, Hades is in the underworld, and you're facing your demons, your fears, your deepest insecurities, because life doesn't work and you are at the gates of death. And that's when you can regenerate under the condition that you made the change. So Pluto switches the direction and says, you've hit rock bottom. you're now needing to reascend. And as you do this change, you go to therapy, or you go back to school and get a degree, or you go and, go to a 12-step program. You change town and try a new thing. Pluto is giving you a new charge of energy. It's like you get a second lease. And so you're now growing to become, to to have another opportunity to develop yourself. And you see that what follows is Jupiter. Jupiter is your first spiritual experience. It's the seeker, it's when you realize there's a higher truth, there's a higher meaning. All these crises were for a purpose. So through Jupiter, you develop your religion. You start to believe in God. And what is God, right? The bottom line of Jupiter is to understand that whatever you're going through is not random, that there is a higher truth, that those struggles are not in vain. So Pluto is through the transformation of Pluto, you're reaching, this first elevation. The triangle shifts back to ascending. So you gain perspective, and Jupiter teaches you that life is not only about security, about survival and sustainability, that life is also about meaning, about ethics, morality, and higher purpose. And then you continue through Saturn and through Uranus and finally through Neptune to reach the oneness of it all, the source of life, the womb of the universe. So some astrologers will say, but it doesn't make sense that, sequentially, we go from Uranus and then Neptune and then Pluto. Why would Pluto rule Scorpio? Maybe it should rule Aries, the following sign, and the other Mars sign. But it ain't like that. It just doesn't work like that. But what you need to understand is that Pluto is the gateway from personal to transpersonal. When you go as low as the bottom of the pit, and Pluto says, now that you've reached that bottom, the only way is back up. And hence begins the journey to return to your spiritual identity, to remember that you're not only flesh and bones, and life is not only about food and, planting seeds, that there's a greater meaning. And so we've explored how Uranus continues that equation and takes you to the higher mind, the ability to understand the bird eye view. So interestingly, if you compare Pluto and Uranus, Pluto takes you under the surface in the underworld, whereas Uranus takes you to the highest, to the space, to the sky, where you can fly with a plane or a spaceship. And so they each provide a different perspective, a transpersonal perspective. Because when you look from a Uranus vantage point, you see life from like you're looking at the Earth from an airplane, and you're seeing things from such, greater clarity, greater perspective. Everything starts to make sense. You're not just looking at what's in front of you. You are more aware. You can have greater understanding. So Uranus represents the genius higher mind. So that interplay between Pluto and Uranus is those triangle shifting. If you even go through the sequence here, Pluto is the underworld, Scorpio, Pluto. Then Jupiter is the horizon. As you gallop, on that horse and basically aim your arrows into the new horizon, and you learn new things, you travel new grounds. So you are expanding your reach as you travel over, through the earth. And then Saturn is the mountain where you climb in the hierarchies, in the maturity, you become more masterful, wiser, and you align yourself, you align your spine with higher wisdom, connecting earth and sky. So Saturn aims to go to the highest peak, which in everyday life translates into becoming an authority, climbing the hierarchical ladder, becoming an elder, a teacher, a boss. And so you reach the peak, and then Uranus comes and gives you wings, and you start to fly, and you take the airplane or you take the space shift. You look at the stars and you understand that you are not only belonging to this planet, that you're also part of a larger solar system, galaxy, multiple galaxies. So your life through these discoveries becomes more, broader, but also more meaningful. And as I've described in the video, this is where Uranus takes you to the highest expression of our civilization. It's how to unlock the future, really. And then comes Neptune. So you went to the depth, you went to the heights. Now Neptune represents everything, all of it. And Neptune represents the source of it all, which basically means that despite our differences, despite the fact that we may be born at different times and we may be different species, you're a bird, I'm a mammal, you lived in the Middle Ages, I live in the 21st century, you're taller, I'm shorter, all these differences dissolve when you enter the Piscean realm, the Neptunian realm of the cosmic ocean. And you remember that even though we look different, we are resonating, wired the same way. All creatures, anything that exists, that is alive, from a tree to an insect, to an animal, a human, we all want to be healthy. We all want to survive. We all try to defend ourselves. And so we're all basically sharing these principles of existence in different shapes, forms, and locations and times. So the 12th house in the Piscean realm reconnects you to this kind of network, this invisible network that brings us all together. We thought we were autonomous, through our Mars. I'm going to, compete and defend myself, and you stay there and I'm here, and don't move, don't get my stuff. To a transpersonal perspective, where we realize that we're all on the same boat, that we all yearn for well-being, happiness, safety, health, and that there is a unifying principle. So let's further explore this as you understand the sequence of the descent and ascension. And that basically is the difference between the personal and the transpersonal planets. Because the personal planets, Mars, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, are basically representing how you have descended into the material world and how you can function here and be in your body, make sure you survive. Then you have the first outer planet that shift that direction and says life is not only about the material world, there is a spiritual identity, there's a spiritual meaning. And that's how you open your awareness and consciousness to a more global, beyond personal understanding of life. And you reach the Jupiter-Saturn gateways. And Jupiter and Saturn are called social planets. So they're not personal and they're not transpersonal. They're somewhere in between. Because Jupiter and Saturn are basically the integration point of the spiritual and the material. They are the wisdom, the guides, the teachers of the zodiac. And where are these teachings coming from? Where is the Bible coming from? Where is all the the ethics and the don't kill and don't steal and all of these guidelines come from? They come from the spirit world, but they are packaged in everyday reality in our civilization. So the social planets basically represent how we can function as a society, not as individuals anymore, but as a society. And what are the rules and guidelines of our culture? Some of it comes from religion, some of it comes from science. They all basically end up conditioning us. Whatever education you're getting comes from Jupiter and Saturn. And so they are the social planets. Then we continue with the transpersonal Uranus, which again is another bridge. Uranus being the higher octave of Mercury, Mercury is a bridge. Uranus is the bridge between Earth, Saturn, the mountain, and spirit, Neptune. So Uranus has a little bit of both. Uranus, Aquarian people can function in the material dimension, but they can also see beyond the material dimension and go beyond time and access spiritual truths that are sourced in the Neptunian realm. So think about, again, birds. What do birds do? Birds are transporting seeds from one place to the next. But they're also, birds is the air archetype, it's the sky. So Uranus represents also transporting knowledge, how we can access higher reservoirs, higher knowledge, higher selves, and bring it to the material. So Neptune is basically the eternal truth. What hasn't changed, no matter when and where you lived, whether you were in ancient Egypt, whether you were, in the Roman times, whether you lived in India, whether you're now, you know, in South America or somewhere, whatever culture you were in, we're all governed by the same truth. Does it matter where or when you experienced love? Right? Love is always true. It was true in the cave times, and it is true now. It is true under the ocean, and it is true in the sky. So these are absolute principles that defy time and space. They are eternal. They are beyond time and space. Justice, peace, love. And truth is basically making us understand that there is an intelligence. Things are not happening by accident. You know, it's not for nothing. Okay, so what is it then? That's why Neptune is always the mystery, because this all-encompassing truth, this higher principle that governs life, everywhere, always, everything, is veiled. We see glimpses of it. We experience some of it, but we cannot always be there because we are in a body and we live in the 21st century and we have limited perception to grasp the totality of it all. But there is a totality. So looking at the higher octave of Venus and Neptune, how do they translate? To begin with, Neptune is spirit, and Venus is material. That is the Taurus-Pisces interplay. When you look at this wheel, people with very strong Pisces, very strong 12th house, when that archetype is really highlighted in their charts, they will not feel comfortable in the physical body. Neptune is spirit. It doesn't want to be confined to a body. It doesn't want to be, focusing on maintenance and details. There's a need to remain free, to be able to love everybody, to not have to, compete or fight battles. There's something about the Neptunian dimension that these folks look at life on Earth, and it can be quite shocking. It's so dense. So Venus represents that integration into the physical. And it could be experienced in two different ways. If the if the interplay between Venus and Neptune is not healthy, then the spirit will feel that it's caged in the body. And this body is so limited. It's, it's frail, it gets sick, and then it will die. And I can only be one place at a time. I can only, I'm bound to gravity. And so it's a struggle. It feels confining. But if the relationship between Venus and Neptune is healthy, then Venus represents the temple, how the physical body can support, ground, and facilitate what the spiritual work is about. So that, in a nutshell, already gives us how they interact and how it could all go very wrong, or it could be an amazing experience. When I speak about this interplay between spirit and matter, between spirit and flesh, we see this in so many ways. Let me show you, the diagram. So Venus rules Taurus and Libra, whereas Neptune rules Pisces. And these signs form a natural, what we call a yod. Yod is this astrological alignment that combines 250-degree angles and a 60-degree angle between planets, between signs, right? So Pisces to Taurus is 60 degrees. Taurus to Libra is 150. Libra to Pisces is 150. The yod has a fated nature, but it also represents something sacred. So let's begin to understand this. Neptune is the womb of the universe before we incarnate. So it is all that realm that we all remember somewhere, that place of unconditional love, that place of paradise, that place where we feel all united. Then we come down and we incarnate, and it becomes a vague memory. Then we get into our personal survival mode because that's how it is. And Venus basically represents how we really integrate into the physical world, beginning with our body, our relationship with our body, our relationship with our sexuality, and then how we, as we said earlier, sustain ourselves. We need to eat 2 to 3 times a day. That's a lot of work. I mean, many of us would wish that, maybe like a snake, you could have one meal that sustains you for a month and you're done with it. You don't have to worry about everything, every day. But we're not built that way. Our metabolism is wired differently. So Venus represents our need to have access to resources because we need that fuel daily. We need oxygen every minute. We need sunlight, fairly enough, but food is a daily matter. And food it's not easy. So the universe created us in such a way that everything's available. There's plenty of food that's free, growing on trees, coming from the earth, but you have to work in order to get it. You have to look for it. What can you eat and what will poison you? Not everything is edible. So discernment. That's why Venus represents the senses, the taste, the smell, the touch, texture. Because through the senses and listening to things, and obviously sight, you can discern what is good and what isn't, what you want to eat and what you don't want to eat. If you eat something that's disgusting, you're going to spit it out. So Venus help us through those senses, through those physical experiences, discern what we keep and what we relinquish. And so it is also concerned with how to have repeated access. It's not enough to find food today. We need it for the whole week and for the whole month and for the whole year. And as I said earlier, our ancestors, most of them were hunter-gatherer, and they collected, food from plants. But then there are seasons, certain plants grow at certain times. You have to find out when. You have to migrate to the right place to get your supplies. And then you start to hunt for meat, and you also have to follow, where your animals are going. And at some point, humans discovered agriculture and preservation of seeds. And that's when we started to be more sedentary. We could stay in one place and not have to migrate all the time. This allows us to build cities. And the concept of ownership became important because some lands will grow certain food, some land will not grow anything, some land will grow other types of food. So whatever you do is going to take time. So if you plant a seed, you want to see the harvest. You need to stay there to be the custodian of that crop. So it's not possible for you to migrate. It's not possible for someone to come and take over because they didn't know what you did. So that concept of ownership didn't come from, wanting to get rich. It came from being, the custodian of that piece of land and making sure due process is complete. But then if you have a very, bountiful yield, which goes to the Virgo, the harvest, then you're wanted. People want to be your friends because they want what you are growing. In one way or another, Venus has to do with the material world. And then with the value of what you have, and with the land and the availability of food, which basically, again, is that temple. It's that ability to nourish your body so that eventually your soul can do its work here. Then Libra represents what cannot grow on your land. If you're growing coconut, you cannot grow berries. If you're farming animals, you're not going to have fish. So we realize through the Taurus side that there's so much we can do on that piece of land, and so much we can do with our assets and what's available to us. There's so much we can do with our own body. What is the first resource we have is our physical body. The fact that we can lift, that we can carry. And this is why Taurus has to do also with physicality, with having a strong, resilient body, because that body is going to help you do things. It's going to be your first tool, your asset. So having a strong and capable body, having all your limbs and all your fingers is important. You need to preserve it because you cannot grow a finger if you lose it. It's a one-time thing. Make good use of it. And so we see, Taurus will use their body as a currency. Hire me so I can help you build your house. Hire me so I can help you lift the stones. Hire me if you want to have sex with me. Prostitution was always a way to get favors, to have support, because the body is your first currency, it's your first tool. But the seventh house represents what you don't have, what others have. So how are you going to get that tomato? How are you going to get the the vitamins or the nutrients or whatever other people are developing, the spices and the medicine that you don't have? You need to exchange. That's why Venus represents self-worth. In the Taurus side is your relationship with who you are, what you have, what you grow, and how much it's worth. And if it's worth, fairly good, fairly enough, then you can go to the Libra side and say, this is what I have. Do you need this? Do you need me? Do you need my strength? Do you need my tomatoes, etc.? And then you can get something in return. So the seventh house is really a place where we are very vulnerable, where we have to rely on others because we cannot produce that. So whatever is in your seventh house by sign is something you look for others to fulfill in your life. You're relying on them to take care of that, sign or that theme in your life. And your currency, what you can exchange is the second house and the sign and the planets there. So your second house and your Venus, it represents your talents, your assets, because it's not just your land, and it's also, can you sing? Can you jump? Can you think deeply? What are the things that you're good at and give you value? And the seventh house is all the things that you are deficient in, that you're not good at, and that you need other people to support you with. Now, of course, there are, it's not always like that, because there are other planet rulers. If the ruler of your seventh house is in your second house, what happens then? Are you, let's take that as an example. If the ruler of your seventh house, let's say your seventh house is in Sagittarius, the ruler Jupiter is in your second house. How does that work? So Sagittarius represents, this confidence to be outspoken, to have faith, to believe in the greater potential of life, in the higher meaning. So for you, this may be something like that's not, up your alley. You're not a religious person. Finding meaning and optimism is you're more of a rational type. And so if you have Sag in the 7th, chances are you'll have Cancer in your 2nd house, because you're going to be Gemini rising, 2nd house Cancer, depending, of course, where you're born on the globe. This can change according to house systems. But in a traditional template way, you're going to have Cancer in your 2nd house. So what are your resources? How you are integrating into your body? You're going to nurture your body. You're going to be very attentive. You're going to be very particular. You're going to be very picky about the food you like and how to take care of yourself. And that is also part of your value, because when I'm buying something from you with that Cancer in the 2nd house, I know you spend time cultivating, singing to your plants, singing to your tomatoes, cuddling with them, and really putting a lot of personal energy there. So no wonder, that Sagittarian energy is a little awkward or foreign to you, because you're not, going into adventures as easily. And I'm talking about philosophical adventures as well as physical ones. But if the ruler of your 7th is in your 2nd, does that mean that your resources are supporting your partner, and that your partner, you're attracting someone who has many good ideas and a lot of plans and is optimistic, Sagittarius, but they can't make any money and you have to finance their ideas. So there may be something about relationship and money that is being played out in this rulership. So just giving you an example of how that interplay between the 2nd and the 7th could work, and you have to look at the rulers, the signs first and the rulers. So we may say Venus in the 2nd house, the 2nd house side of Venus, the Taurian side of Venus, is about self-appreciation, self-love, and self-worth. 7th house is about appreciation of what others have, ability to connect and love others, and the ability to exchange and have fairness. What is the fairness of Libra? Is that I give you something, you give me something back, and we're satisfied. That's a Venus word, satisfaction. Venus in the 2nd house is how I'm satisfied with who I am. Venus in the 7th, as a 7th, is how I'm satisfied from the exchange. And so how does Neptune come into this? Let's explore. Here is a little diagram that explains this. So 2nd house is self-love. 7th house is love of others or for others. And the 12th house is the love of life. So if Venus represents satisfaction, Neptune represents not just, oh, I'm satiated now. I have a great sensual experience, and this is a tasty meal, and I love your passion fruits. But Neptune says, are you happy with your life as a whole? Are you happy with your incarnation? So the sense of satisfaction moves from a particular thing, a particular experience, to a more global experience of life. Are you satisfied with all that there is? Because the 12th house and Neptune is not a relationship with this person or that person. It's a relationship with God, with existence. So in the 12th house, you ask yourself, do I get along with God? Do I get along with my life? Am I swimming upstream or downstream? Am I going with the flow or am I fighting the flow? Am I satisfied with life? Do I find my inner peace? Now, as you know, I've done extensive work on the 12th house, and I definitely recommend that you explore those principles. Book on Neptune, the 12th house in Pisces, which really, at the end of the day, boils down to that existential question. Does life work for you? And that means, how do you really find happiness? And each placement of Neptune has its own code, has its own revelation about that. I also encourage you a whole workshop on that if you're interested. So you see how the personal, the temporal, the, immediate satisfaction is transposed to a more existential spirit, higher perspective on what satisfaction is. Neptune represents being able to relate to any person. If Libra says, I want you because you look good, or because you sell those things, and because you can give me something I don't have, it's very specific. Neptune says, we're all one. I'm going to need you as much as I'm going to need that person, and I'm going to need this tree. And so we're all one and the same. I am the tree. I am the politician. I am Maurice. And I am also in relationship with everybody as a result. So it is not specific. It is not personal anymore. It's unconditional. It's transpersonal. Let's explore these concepts. So Venus, Neptune represent the physical manifestation of the spiritual dimension. Now, just remember that and look at this image. You see beauty. Venus represents beauty. The colors, the flowers, the fragrance, the good taste. What is beauty? Beauty is the successful integration of spirit into form. It's when the form captures the spirit. So the spiritual dimension can find its temple. And if the temple, if the shape, if the mold holds the spirit successfully, it emanates beauty. That sacred geometry, that balance of proportions. There's wisdom, there's truth in this image, in this flower, in its scent. So the interplay between Venus and Neptune, if we speak about beauty, Venus represents the physical beauty of something that is spiritually whole. So your incarnation, as you come into your body, can show the beauty of God, the beauty of truth, of the universe in those different forms. Now, it doesn't mean that if someone doesn't have supermodel proportions and standards, that they're not going to capture the spiritual. We know that it's more complex than that. But this is where it begins. So when I say Venus is the spiritual, is a physical integration of the spirit, you understand how Venus is basically is the physical spirituality and the incarnation, so that the soul can be here. And so how can we live our spirituality in form? Value and appreciation. So when you have people with strong Venusian Neptunian qualities, and that means if you have a lot of Taurus, second house, a lot of Libra, seventh house, and a lot of Pisces, 12th house, and you have Neptune, Venus on angles or on the nodal axis, they are amplified and amplified. And so people who are born with an abundance of Venus and Neptune themes in their charts are going to resonate to these qualities. They're going to be people who appreciate, who value what there is. They're going to look at the positive, at the full glass, because Venus, Neptune are not going, are about value. So they're not going to look at the ugly, at the failure, or at things that are basically toxic or detrimental. So there's a natural resonance to that sense of contentment and satisfaction. Beauty, both in form and spirit. The sacred geometry of it all. But it's not only sacred geometry, it is also harmony. When you look at something beautiful, it soothes you, it calms you. So Venus, Neptune folks are people who usually pacify, harmonize, unify. They cannot be in conflict, because conflict brings disharmony and it's not whole anymore. How to overcome negativity and how to focus on what is good. Even if you're with someone, who's not doing well or who's not behaving well, the Venus-Neptune person will come and see their potential. You're talented. You could be successful. They see the value of a person or a situation. And that's a very valuable tool, because a lot in this world has to do with attitude. If you have the right attitude, even if you're in a difficult situation, you can prevail more easily if you are seeing the positive in it, if you're seeing this as an opportunity rather than a defeat. Sustainability. These signs are not change makers. Venus, Neptune are about sustaining. Neptune is about the eternal truth, that which is true anywhere, anytime, for everybody, always. And Venus has to do with needing to have satisfaction, security, nourishment on a longer term. It's not enough to, like Mars, have a victory now. I need to keep that over time. I need to sustain the good and the solid. And so this is why Venus has to do with permanence, with anchoring. So Venus Neptune people are adverse to change. And of course, I'm generalizing. You have to look at the whole chart. But they are more about let's make the best of what we have rather than, keep reinventing the wheel all the time. In that sense, they are more passive. They are more accepting what is and doing with what we have. Mental health, as we said, if you're in good spirit, it doesn't matter how challenging the situation is, because you can find your satisfaction and your peace. Venus and Neptune are representing peace, physical peace, and spiritual peace. And so if you find peace, even if you are in a storm, you can find your peace. And that is a gift. However, the risk is that because they're so, avoiding of confrontation and of challenges that can be very aggressive, they may not have coping mechanism to deal with friction, toxicity. So what happens when a Venus Neptune person who believes in what people do, who want to see the positive in every situation, are suddenly confronted with abuse and with destruction, with the Plutonian realm of darkness? They could be the remedy, and they could come to the Plutonian entities and actually pacify it. It's like, okay, you big monster, I'm going to hug you. And then that monster may suddenly, wait, I don't have anyone to hate. I don't have anyone to fight. Maybe I should learn to trust again. So they could dissolve the hard core of something that's very negative. But if they don't manage to do that, then they don't have the coping mechanism and they could shut down. Venus Neptune people can feel at times that life's too much. Wow, I mean, turn off that CNN, because school shootings and child labor and slavery and racism and starvation, it's too much. I'm overwhelmed. So I'm closing that window. And then this person is toxic and they lie to me and they're intense. And that person, is totally in their victim mode and they sucking my energy. And so they can end up basically retreating, limiting exposure, because everything becomes too much. What we're seeing here is the risk that their immune system weakens. So if your immune system weakens, you become oversensitive to everything, whether it's food, energy, weather, people, everything gets to you, and your world shrinks. And so the downside of this, the risk of that, is that the Venus Neptune people end up basically finding their peace only when there's no one around. And that's not sustainable if we speak about sustainability. So there can be a level of mental health fragility if they don't pay attention, because it's a choice in this case. So part of the coping mechanism is to, on the one hand, be the mediators, be the pacifiers, be the ones who will bring positive energy where it's lacking, bring value when it's undervalued. But on the other hand, it, it could be very fragile. So sustenance, supply, appreciation, positive, passive. Passivity is very, prominent. They're not initiators. They sustain and unify, and of course, beauty, calm, not ambitious. Venus, Neptune is about having enough. So our culture pushes us to more and more and more, whereas Venus, Neptune is more about what is, what we have. Now, Venus can have an appetite, and you may see Venusian people wanting more. It's not black and white there, because the downside of Venus is greed. More chocolate and more comfort and a bigger house and more artwork. And it goes on, that they never feel satisfied until there's more. But you have to look how that Venus interacts with other planets. And I'm going to talk about greed because it's part of this equation. But in a healthy way, Venus will say, I do need food. I do need comfort. I do need sustainability. And once I have that, I'm good. So they're good at preserving, at recycling, and at sustaining. They are not so much interested in pushing and growing because they don't like stress. So somebody ambitious has to take risks, has to change, has to confront situations and challenges. And they're like, I don't need that. Like, I'd rather be content with what I have as long as I have it. Now, if it's negative and it turns toxic, Venus, Neptune can become lazy, overly passive, and procrastinate everything because, I have what I need. Why do I need to now, do the chores? Why do I need to get out of my way? And so there can be an over attachment to the comfort that becomes overly sedentary, overly, yeah, basically lacks movement. Can become addictive. We talk about greed. I'm going to add here. And it's not just alcohol and all of that. It's anything sweet. Venus has to do with sweetness, with the nectar, the fruit, and all the sugars that are abundant in nature. And part of if we speak about chemistry in our body, it's the serotonin. It's the feel-good hormones that we can translate into wanting more sugar, wanting more comfort. And we can become addicted to anything that soothes our soul, because when life gets to be too much, how can I round those edges How can I feel more calm? I may need to numb my pain. I may need to, like we say, retreat from struggles and shy away from confrontations and end up basically diabetic. You know, there's actually a risk when people have Jupiter, excuse me, Venus, Neptune, and Jupiter. This can affect thyroid function, slow the metabolism, and it can lead to pancreatic problems and diabetes. So it applies on the psychological as well as the biological. Avoidance, tendency for avoiding confrontations and challenges, which can also lead to denial. So when Venus, Neptune are active and they want to see the positive, what can happen is that you deny the negative. You don't want to see it. So you understand why in the wheel, opposite Venus is always Mars or Pluto. Because one pacifies and the other one challenges. So if you have too much of one or the other, you can become too aggressive, or you can deny everything. Here, denial can also lead to enabling. So Venus, Neptune folks may not have healthy boundaries and don't like to say no. You want this? Yes. You want me to help you? Yes. You don't want to go to school? Yes. You need another drink? Yes. So that kind of non-confrontational approach, seeing the positive in everything, can lead to a lack of discernment, problem with boundaries, which then enable negative behavior, destructive, dysfunctional behavior, and doesn't put a stop to it. You know, it's basically feeding the parasite or enabling someone who's struggling with addiction to keep their addiction, to have it get worse. So that is the shadow side of the Venus Neptune paradigm. Where is the transpersonal versus the personal? So Venus is the physical beauty, the sacred geometry, we saw in that flower, the balance of proportion. It represents physical balance. Neptune represents simplicity and wholeness. So wholeness versus balance. And of course, inner beauty, spiritual beauty, compassion, goodness. Venus represents the earth and the land, the food, the senses, smell, touch, taste. And that helps us discern good from bad. Don't eat that. It doesn't taste good. Don't touch that. It's a thorn. And so Venus represents satisfaction. But Neptune represents an overall, a general sense of contentment that all is good. Even the challenging is good. And so that serenity. Venus is about having and lacking, the exchange, with us and others, a relationship with others. Venus represents connection, whereas Neptune represents oneness, that we are anyway connected, and we're not connected. We are, all of us. I'm not connected to you. I am you, says Neptune. So that's, again, how Venus functions in the material world, in the time and space, personal realm versus the timeless transpersonal realm. Physical comfort for Venus, security, available resources and support that brings you stability and calm. And Neptune represents happiness. That is, again, hopefully sustainable. Venus is making sure we have enough fuel for survival, which means use nature, have shelter, grow your food, make sure there are, that whatever nature provides, the wood, the fruits, the plants, the animals are all accessible. But Neptune says we have all that we need and we have natural immunity. So it is what nature is providing. So Neptune is representing the gifts of God that we see in nature. And Venus is how we use the gift of God, how we harvest and plant and discern. Okay? Venus is what I want and what I need, and the choices I need to make by discernment. Whereas Neptune says the larger forces of life beyond your control decide. Fate decides. These don't apply. They belong to the other workshop, but this one is important, so I'm going to delete that, which was my last important point. So another reflection on this, the material versus the spiritual. Venus says all you need, shopping, all that, is that all that you need? And Neptune holds love and says, yes, that's all that I need. So again, if we look at Venus and Taurus, we see all these feminine qualities. The horns and the cow looks like a birthing canal, the sex organs, the fertility of a woman, the earth connection, the paganism, the fruits and the splendor of nature, the richness of nature. So that's the Venus. But Neptune says this is a physical manifestation of the Spirit of God. Earth is that. So looking at some charts, this is Anthony Gaudi, who was an exceptional, amazing genius architect. And he had Venus in the 12th house. So it was not conjunct Neptune or opposed Neptune, but it was in the house of Neptune. But you also notice in his chart that he has all the Venus-Neptune placements by house and by sign. So 12th house, 7th house, 2nd house, and Taurus, Libra, Pisces. So a repetition of this Neptune-Venus connection by aspect and by house and by sign. And look at his architecture. Look how his form, building temples, is what he did. And he built the Sagrada Familia. If you don't know what it is, Google it. Anthony Gaudi's church in Barcelona. And it's all about the physical and the spiritual. He is that. Now, we speak about how this works well together, and that's wonderful. But we have to look at the challenging sides of Venus Neptune, because what happens when spirit and body, when spirit and flesh don't talk to each other? You can have many folks who are very Neptunian and we look at the material world as corrupt, limited, profane. And so most spiritual traditions, especially in the last 2000 years of the Pisces age, which we're talking about, most of the spiritual tradition are encouraging us to become spiritual by detaching from the material. Renunciation, let go of all your possession to devote yourself to spirituality. Relinquish your sexuality and lust and greed to devote yourself to spiritual practice. You read all the scriptures, they will tell you that the material world is profane. The material world is deceptive. And that if you let go of your appetite for sex, appetite for materialism, then and only then you can grow in spirit. So we end up creating basically a fracture between Pisces and Taurus. They are very different. Now, Taurus says, I cannot live from thin air and from spirit. I need a meal. I need to have money in the bank. I need to make sure that I have physical security. I don't want to fast. I'm hungry now, right? So your appetite, Venus, can take over. So do you have spirit over matter or matter over spirit? You enter a very complex equation. And I will say there is a spiritual war on Taurus around the world in our time, where Neptune overrides Venus or the other way around. So our churches and temples speak about chastity, poverty, obedience. That's all Neptune, spirit, no body, no physical. Giving up family and human relationships, rejection of materialism, and renunciation of rank and distinction. So you see this image of the slums versus the skyscrapers. You see that what this can lead to is that you unconsciously develop a disdain, a detachment from earth, from food, from resources. So Neptune kind of detaches from Venus and says what really matters is not the material world. Your body fools you into all kinds of lusty delusions. And you become attached and you forget that you have a spiritual identity. So we end up neglecting nature, abusing nature. We don't understand the sacredness of earth. that's a risk. In more extreme ways, this is a practice in India. So it's not just one religion. It permeates all religions, where this person ties rocks to his penis to desensitize it so that he won't be quote unquote controlled by his sexual needs. And he neutralizes his lower chakras to only dwell in spirit. And then you have rituals of, the stigmata or, all kinds of rituals that are in different traditions to harm your body, to feel physical pain as a way to ascend in spirit. Because if you hurt your body, then you detach from it and you don't give it importance. But what this leads to is, of course, all kinds of distortions and wounds related to how we treat our body, either through abstinence, neglect of the body, or greed and uncontrollable appetites. The way, I also look at this, if we look at the Taurus representing financial wealth, the Wall Street bull, and how we treat our cows, where we pump them with hormones or we cage them in horrible conditions. It's all related to this fracture between the spirit and the matter and spirit at odd. And so you have on the one hand preaching chastity, poverty, and obedience, and you have, blind wealth of people who have gold toilets and things that they excessively, take advantage of. So in a way, Neptune can create this feeling that I have so much money, I don't even count it. It's like taken for granted. So all these realities that we meet every day on subtle levels or on more obvious levels are quite often tied into this Venus-Neptune divorce. So what we can have on the upper side here of this slide is either flesh without spirit, where we are abusing our Venus, we're, not considering Neptune at all, and only want to gratify the senses. Let's eat more, let's fuck more, let's get, an intoxication of our senses. So we create an oversexed culture that is very, the greed of Venus, the attachment to senses. Or you have spirit without flesh, where you hide your flesh because it's considered profane. It's leading you to temptation. You either shave your head or you hide your hair, and you don't want any kind of sexual memory. And see how the hair is usually an issue, but the skin as well, like not showing skin. Skin is Venus with Saturn too, but it's the tone of your skin, the physicality of touch, and is Venusian. And so you're kind of repressing your Venus, your sensuality in all kinds of weird ways, or you overindulge. So we live in a society that is either or. the fracture between Venus and Neptune. You know, another example of that, where Miss Kardashian wants to break the internet by showing her bottom. You know, like that imagery is so Venusian. And you have this other lady who is either not allowed or doesn't want to show any flesh, and sometimes has to even cover her eyes. Now, speaking of Kardashian, yes, she has a Venus Neptune square. And Pisces moon opposing Venus. So you see that she is herself dealing with this battle between the material and the spiritual. Many people who are born with Venus Neptune aspects, or again, the signs Taurus, Pisces, abundance, Taurus, Libra, Pisces, are going to deal with this. They're going to flip to one side, they're going to give in to the senses, and then they're going to go into austerity, and they're going to control their senses to transcend Neptune, transcend your Venus. So Kardashian is one of them. Now, on the other side, this is Armita Girvand, a young girl in Iran who was born with Venus Neptune. And last year, she refused to wear the head covering. And as a result, was beaten to death. First, with a head brain injury, was in a coma. So the attack was on October 1st, 2023, and she died in October 29, 2023. So you see that Venus, Neptune, that battle between showing your body and being forbidden to show your body. And she's an Aries, so she, wanted to confront, to defy, because if she didn't have the Aries signatures, then she may have hidden instead, rather than confronted. But it all happens when the transit of Venus, which just came out of retrograde in Leo, opposed her own Venus Neptune. So tragedy of that fracture. And of course, Neptune in Pisces quincunx that Venus in Leo. Another very interesting expression of Venus Neptune is Madonna, who, throughout her life and career played on the saint prostitute theme. Spirituality and sexuality. And you see that on a deep level, her soul is trying to reconnect between spirituality and sexuality. But, she was a bit awkward at it. She was, on the one hand, devoting herself to spiritual practices, to Kabbalah, but she renounced, she rejected initially, the Catholic imprinting and conditioning of her family. It's shaming her for her sexuality. And you see, she's a Neptune in the second house, and it squares Venus very tightly. So she played that the prostitute, the oversexed, and the sex books, and wearing very revealing outfits when she's now in her late 60s, trying to hold on to her youth, to her Venusian qualities, and not embracing the Neptune side of, get over your physicality. She becomes intoxicated by her physicality to the point of needing these constant uh, plastic surgeries. But so you see that battle between Venus and Neptune, but most importantly, you see how there's a deep spiritual side to her, wanting to understand, the larger truth of life, the spiritual qualities that is beyond the physical, but how she tried to bring it through art. Venus is in Leo, through performance, through, her burning crosses, and then really being bringing those dichotomies in her performance. Prince is another example. Prince, the love sexy, that Venus in Taurus on the South Node in Taurus is so sensual. And, all his songs were about getting off and about sexy motherfucker. And, he loved sex. He poses naked on his album Love Sexy. So you see the lust and you see the sensuality and the appetite. And then he becomes a Jehovah's Witness. And there's no more getting off. It's all sealed, covered. So you see that Neptune in his 12th house with Jupiter to add the religiousness, contrasting the Venus in the 6th that is so physical, so much in the body. So that opposition shows the battle between the body and the soul. Is my body betraying me? Is my body, distracting me from a spiritual well-being? And of course, one extreme won't work and the other extreme won't work. We go back to this opposition. If you deny the flesh, you're living in limitation. And if you deny the spirit, you're living in limitation. They need to marry, to work together. And you will see many artists, especially musicians, with Venus-Neptune connection, Taurus-Pisces connections, because they're able to bring the spirit into the senses. So Leonard Cohen, very poetic and beautiful, low frequency voice, is a Venus-Neptune guy. And so interesting in his life story that he was born Jewish, had a very traditional upbringing in Canada, and then eventually also embraced Buddhism. And after, years of touring and being the rock star or the poet star, he renounced his material life and spent time in a Buddhist monasteries for years. So he lived the simple life away from physical distraction, sexuality, and the material world. And the irony is that as he was in his retreat, the manager who was taking care of his finances stole all his money. And she basically swindled him. And he realized, well, he was eventually at some point, he was so naive. And he ended up getting, he came out of the monastery without resources, without physical resources. She drained his accounts. Luckily for Mr. Cohen, he could go back on the road, went on a world tour, and managed to regenerate. But it's the irony of that renunciation that also led to him basically being swindled, which to me, from a spiritual point of view, is that he was carefree about his physical assets, and that he paid a price for not valuing, for not protecting the material gain and efforts. From a Libra side, this is a lady called Ilona Staller, who is Hungarian by origin, but lived or still lives in Italy, was a porn star. And then became involved in politics in Italy, and was elected to government, not a leader, but as part of the parliament. So she's born with Venus-Neptune conjunction in the 12th house. So that kind of repeating theme of Venus, Neptune, Libra, 12th house. And, in a very Venus-Neptune ways, Venus in Libra is looking for a partner. But Neptune says everyone is a partner. So there's no discernment. Venus-Neptune can become a prostitute because it's unconditional love. If you pay me. But emotionally, even if you're paid to have sex with people, you still need to be able to engage, to show some affection, some sensuality. So even if someone will say, I need the money, not everyone is able to perform in this kind of indiscriminate sexual expression. So you see here that the Venus Neptune interplay is basically Neptune making her transcend the Venus, so that her relationships will not be specific, but will be global. And that's what she said eventually. In order to bring peace, Neptune Venus, she wanted to, at the time in the 90s when all this was happening, she offered to have sex with Saddam Hussein. So again, a very Venus Neptune kind of unconditional and pacifying and let's make love, not war approach. Another intriguing example is Nick Vujicic. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, probably, I'm sorry. So he has a Venus-Neptune conjunction. Venus is in his 12th house. But it also is forming a yard to Chiron in Taurus and Pluto in Libra. So there's a Pluto, Neptune, Chiron. And this is the example of someone who was born with a very compromised body. He was born without limbs, without hands, without feet. Talk about physical limitation. Talk about spirit not feeling that the body can hold me and that my body is a cage or my body is limiting. So Chiron in the sixth house in Taurus shows the wound of the physical body and how Neptune on the ascendant, on an angle, is so prominent with Venus there. How is he overcoming? Is that he found God. He became very religious, born again, and leading a ministry where he teaches, he encourages people to think positive. And he managed to be very successful through his positive attitude. So he obviously went through deep existential crisis, asking himself, why me? You can see videos of him, of how he details, some of these struggles. But eventually that Venus Neptune kept, and in the 12th house and in Sagittarius, kept his spirit high and could see the positive in this intense crisis, where he becomes now a motivational speaker, and he marries, he has children, he drives, jumps into pools, goes surfing. So one of the things that he says is, I can do anything. So obviously there's Mars determination, not giving up, but it's the positive spirit of Venus and Neptune in the 12 that help him basically transcend spirit over matter. See the big picture. Don't get stuck in the negative, in the physical. And yet live well in the physical. He's making money, he is married, has kids. So at least as far as we know, he managed to bridge the physical and the spiritual. Even though at first it was a war, because his body did not match his spirit. Now, to some extent, if you hear him, it becomes sometimes too positive. It's almost invulnerable. Nothing's wrong, everything's good. That can go overboard as well. Something to think about. I want to give another example here of this person born with Venus, Neptune in his 12th house is a breatharian and tantric practitioner. So breatharian means that he practices feeding from breath rather than food. So he goes through extended periods of fasting, including water. So no food and no water for days. And he keeps pushing the limits, and he teaches that. So there is something about the Venus-Neptune quality about wanting to be above food. We saw how some people try to be above the body or hide the body, how people renounce sexuality. And here it's a food issue. We also see Chiron is also in Taurus. So there's something about the physical world, and see how Chiron is isolated there. All the planets are opposite, in the opposite hemisphere. And so that Taurian food is compromised, it's wounded. And with Venus, Neptune as part of the yod, we have Venus, Neptune, Chiron, and then Pluto, Jupiter. How, again, mind over matter, spirit over matter, trying to live from thin air, not having to be tied to the routine of food, to the digestion of physicality. So it's an attempt, again, to relinquish the physical to be in the spiritual. Now, I'm not, close enough to this person to know what happens in their personal lives. They may be able to balance it better and to do this as a worthy exercise. But if it's too much, you have to ask yourself, why do we have food? Why is Earth provided? If we understand that the material world is not profane, but it is actually sacred, that Earth is sacred, that food is sacred, that beauty is actually sacred, then we don't need that austerity, that divorce between the physical and the spiritual. And a great example of that is Leonardo da Vinci, who was a Taurus with Venus in Taurus and a Pisces moon, again, forming a yod to Neptune in Libra. So you have the same repetition of signs, Libra, Pisces, Taurus, with different planets. And he brought the divine in art. How his physical creations, his architecture, his paintings, his mathematical genius was basically an amazing fusion of spirit with matter. So a creative genius, whether it's musical or any other form of expression, will bring the sacred, the eternal into flesh, into form. Another interesting expression of that, I'm going to close with these two charts. This is the chart of the United Nations. It was created in 1945, right after the atomic bombs were dropped in the summer of 1945 on Japan. Japan surrendered. Hitler died. And the United Nations was kind of a response to the destruction, to how to unify. So we talked about how Pluto was discovered in 1930s, and it brought all these dark scenarios of a recession and fascism and destruction and the atomic bomb. And then you have here a Venus-Neptune, along with Chiron and Jupiter, to bring hope, unification in Libra, to bring all nations together so that we may prevent such disasters, at least not allow them to occur so quickly. Now, we know the United Nations is what it says. Unites nation, Venus, Neptune. Beyond our geography, we can work together. We have common objectives, common values. Let's bring what unites us. But we also know how sometimes the United Nations is more theory than practice. That a lot of what is happening is more symbolic and is not always practical. And that's the downside of Neptune Venus, where we can have ideals, but how do we actually implement them? Do we have a strong enough Mars? Here it's Aries rising. Take action, the rising sign is always the calling. The 12th house sign is what we expect. So we expect harmony and union with Pisces in the 12th and Neptune, Venus, but we need to take action, Aries rising. Another Venus, Neptune is the fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989. Now, in all honesty, I mean, this event is mostly a Saturn-Neptune because Saturn is walls, Neptune is dissolving. And you see how Saturn, Neptune, and Jupiter came together at the same degree to create a political change, a change of ideologies, and a deconstruction of a structure that was completely dysfunctional. The United Nations is the same Jupiter, Venus with Neptune. So Jupiter was also involved here, as it is here in the fall of the Berlin Wall. But the Venus-Neptune is the unification of the West with the East. How the Saturn stand in between the wall, and Venus-Neptune are basically breaking the wall to unify the divide between the East and the West. So beautiful symbolism. But here again, Mars on the angles, destruction. We need to destroy something. And this happened at 10:45 p.m., just as the moon moved from Pisces to Aries. Action was taken. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you continue study with me. I'm calling you to take astrology seriously. And you can choose those different workshops. You can explore the teachings, some of the testimonials here, share how this course has changed lives. Signing up for your program is really the best thing I've done. I've been so bored, uninspired. And now I found that thanks to you. This material is amazing. I'm very, very, very grateful. Very much enjoying this segment. How incredible astrology is and your teachings. So I'm reading this so that people can have it in caption in different languages. Check the books if you need a private consultation. And on this note, many blessings.